Hello and welcome to Thursday Night Talk. This is a show where we discuss the week in Humboldt, the local issues, and the local personalities with some local personalities. I'm Talvi Free to be your local host for the next hour. There really is never a dull moment in Humboldt County. Recent headlines this past week include the approval of a reality TV show for the county sheriff's recruiting effort, supposedly for the county sheriff's recruiting effort, a Humboldt County grand jury report slamming Eureka City schools for Brown Act misdeeds, a shortage of firefighters at the beginning of what may be a very long fire season, and a Cal Poly Humboldt training manual, which may have inflamed recent student protests. Welcome everyone. I've got some local newsies here with me. North Coast Journal's news editor Thaddeus Greenson, KMUD reporter Lisa Music, Ryan Huston, freelance reporter predominantly working with Kim Kemp. Welcome everyone.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, because I don't know how long this topic's going to take, and it seems like not that I want to have an entire show about sheriffs and cops and all of that, though. Wow, they couldn't keep themselves out of the media this week, this month, the past while. They are just everywhere. So let's get into it. Let's start off with the Cal Poly training manual, because I'm curious about what it possesses within it, because I love training manuals. They make me happy. I actually took some courses in Nevada for some legal courses that were, I guess, precursors to PD courses. And so I'm curious what the difference between Humboldt counties is versus a place like Las Vegas. So what was in those?
Lisa, go.
So it wasn't specifically for Cal Poly Humboldt. This was, according to the report issued yesterday, was supposedly created by Ryan Derby of the Humboldt County Office of Emergency Services back in 2020. And Derby shared those training documents with other law enforcement that were present with Cal Poly Humboldt and incoming officers. That the report said that Humboldt County Sheriff's requested. So for me, the big bombshell here, and I know we've had a lot of discussion in the comment section about, is this a bombshell? The bombshell for me in reading this was that the impression given at the time was that Humboldt County Sheriff's Office was taking an assistant role and not necessarily leading, but their key people were in key positions of that entire operation. And Ryan Derby particularly was, I believe, head of operations, Ryan, or logistics, and was the one requesting the law enforcement presence be here. Under whose direction, we don't know at this point, because we have been unable to obtain interviews with either Derby or Hansel on this matter.
Mm-hmm. And I would just say that's correct. Ryan Derby is noted not only as the lead on logistics, but also, I'm looking at it's right here, as deputy chief of planning. So also notable, Peter Kress, incident commander, and he's with Cal Poly Humboldt, I believe. Somebody fact check me on that, but I think
he was the interim police chief at the time.
Aha, yes, that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've got some familiar names on that list. Yeah, and what I also wanted to point out, and I think Lisa saw this pretty quickly as well, there's no in all of this planning and training manual, there's a planning section and then like an operations It's called Siemens Hall Occupation. It's an operational manual, basically, right? And so between that and the planning packet that Ryan Derby distributed by email to incoming law enforcement, it looks like, there's nothing in there that addresses how to cope with press on the scene. And I don't mean protesters, I mean press, right? So I found that to be notable. And one thing I would mention is that I do think there was more to the document request that the Appeal, the news outlet that published the first article on this that I kind of recapped. There was more in emails and such that were referenced in their article that were not provided with that 46 pages. So I'm interested in what I'm not seeing there too.
And I think that, in that document, that training document, problematic for me were, and I think where we look at the breakdown, law enforcement has to do their job. If the university calls them and says, these people are trespassing, we want them removed, it is their job to do this. The question comes into play, especially for press, when press were removed from the area. A reporter was detained and put into zip tie cuffs and put on the bus. I believe she might have even been bused there, but never actually booked. That becomes problematic. The ACLU addressed this and noted this. One of the things that we do as reporters is make sure that what's happening is documented. And we were not allowed to do that. Our reporters were shoved out. I don't know, Thaddeus, if you guys had reporters there on scene that were shoved out. But that became problematic. And behind the scenes, it was kind of like they were maybe a little bit kerfuffled that it happened and kind of walked it back. Obviously, they did not arrest or charge that reporter. But perhaps these limited documents that we have show that there was not a plan in place for press, which press had been present. Ryan had that viral video published from inside that first interaction between the police and the protesters on the 22nd. So I think that that is a huge oversight or worse on their part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd just like to add that, Lisa. I think that, yeah, in the operations plan, at least as the one that we've seen, there is no mention of any accommodations for press in a situation where they knew press had been on scene, interacting with the protesters throughout the duration of, of this 8-day protest. So that seems kind of, a pretty egregious omission. But I'd also say in the, training slides that were produced by Ryan Derby that were disseminated, there was also, slides devoted to instances of what they called, violent opportunists disguising themselves as press. And so especially in a sense when you are disseminating information about that, people with, press might be, disguising themselves as press and have violent intentions, it seems all the more glaring not to have a plan to deal with actual press on scene. It seems like you're setting up a situation to go very poorly, and maybe we're lucky that things didn't go worse than they did in that regard as far as the treatment of press on scene.
I would wholeheartedly concur with that. I was pretty horrified in the moment when I realized, kind of in slow motion, the realization, right, that, oh, I'm being kettled. This is what it's like to be kettled, right? Mm-hmm. And so, having the urge to be the fly on the wall and document what I'm sure was happening out of view, it was just really upsetting to know and feel in that moment that there was no regard, at least from my perception, for respect of the First Amendment and for the ability of press to do our job.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I think another thing that jumped out at me from the materials in the appeal that the appeal published is, that in that slideshow that Ryan Derby created and then apparently disseminated to all of the officers or all the departments that were sending officers to the scene. Again, there was this piece talking about violent opportunists embedding themselves with otherwise peaceful protests, but there was very little information about how officers were supposed to discern the two, how any acknowledgement that, even going back to the 2020 protest with George Floyd, that the vast majority, 99% of the people involved in these things were peaceful and just wanting to exercise their First Amendment rights. And so that was absent in Derby's slideshow, I felt like. And then that was especially absent in the operations plan of saying, look, most of these people we expect to be peaceful students, which I think, despite some of the rhetoric coming from Cal Poly about, criminal activity and stuff, there's absolutely vandalism on campus, and that's absolutely a crime, but there were no reports of, of wildly violent behavior. And so to not kind of have that front and center in the operations, that most of these folks are going to be students and there should be the expectation that they're going to be peaceful, seemed like a glaring omission to me also.
So it sounds like this manual was made very last minute for this specific situation.
It was actually made in 2020 and referenced the in reaction, I believe, to the George Floyd protests, and to which Derby had written in an email that the situation was almost identical, that they were using identical tactics at Cal Poly Humboldt. So this was not specific to Cal Poly Humboldt, but was alluded to be the same situation regarding the protesters. And I think, I was a little offended by the violent opportunist term, just because I think that anytime that you're dealing with public, and I think this speaks to a broader law enforcement perspective, if you're anticipating violence, your reaction tends to be violent. And when I'm speeding, I know that I'm breaking the law, but I'm not expecting to get shot. I'm expecting to maybe get a speeding ticket, have my insurance raised, maybe lose my license. When these students went into this, they knew that there was the possibility of being, suspended, expelled, arrested, having a court case and some fines. The threat of violence and the violent encounter that occurred on the 22nd, I think, did not necessarily have to happen, especially when it seems like the breakdown in this situation, whether you agree with the protesters or not, is the difference in language between the students, the staff, and the administrators at Cal Poly Humboldt.
So with everything that happened at Cal Poly Humboldt, because it wasn't just the university's police department, they brought in police departments from all around the county. It seemed like, or at least that's the reports that I've heard.
Throughout the state, really.
Yeah. So it looks like the county sheriff's office is now going to be their own media because they've been greenlit for, it's called On Patrol Live, which would that somehow benefit those who want the press to be there, because now they are technically taking that into their own hands and being their own press?
I guess it depends on who has editing control.
Well, I mean, according to the information presented to the Board of Supervisors when they okayed it, the producers of the show have unfettered editing control, which is super interesting to me.
I thought that there was like a caveat about if it put law enforcement in danger, then they could withhold details or because it's going to happen live, right? But I think that there's a condition, and I wish I had that article in front of me wherever I read this, but I feel like there was some allowance for exceptional circumstances that they felt like, oh, this is too much for the public to know, or this isn't a developing investigation, or I'm not sure what the bar would be to withhold footage or delay the publishing of the footage, I think was more the idea.
I think that was, I mean, I think that's there is a kind of a blackout mode where the sheriff's office, and I'm not sure the mechanisms for it, but can say like this can't be live because it's, you know, there's tactical concerns or whatnot. But
Right.
when it comes to how to present what is just recorded, I think that the producers have kind of full discretion how they're going to do that, other than those kind of critical incidents or whatnot that the sheriff's office says can't be aired live.
One of the critiques from, I believe, Supervisor Arroyo was either Arroyo, maybe Madrone, maybe Wilson. There's only a few supervisors, but it was one of those three, and they said, "Won't this, like, how will this make the county look?" Because we've had Murder Mountain, searching for Bigfoot, which is all the same thing. It's just a bunch of people dying in the hills or getting murdered in the hills. And now suddenly you're going to have sheriffs on patrol doing their thing. There's a degree of transparency. Like, this isn't Florida. The reason that they do filming in certain states for, it's the Bad Boys cop show is because they have those transparency laws where you can publish anything about anybody at any time. It's not really a two-party consent state, whereas California is. I know there's reasonable expectation of privacy. So if you're out in your front yard on the corner street hosing debris off your yard, someone can take a picture of you and post it on social medias. Though, what does this mean for people in Humboldt County? And again, will it make, they're saying that they're using this for a recruitment because everybody's short on staff now, which is hilarious because everybody's looking for jobs. So is this going to make the police force, the local sheriff's, Humboldt County Sheriff's Office look good? Is it going to make Humboldt County look good? How would you feel if you or your friends ended up on that show?
I'll weigh in. I actually think that the sheriff's office has been doing a really good job with their promotional tactics and stuff. And I think that, there's just a nationwide shortage of officers. I think that financially, this is not always the smartest move. And if you're going to go into a line of work, you usually are willing to go somewhere that pays you better, unless it's some homegrown people, which we have this outlaw culture here that maybe does not lend itself, or even people that are now ready to step into that realm are not going to pass those background checks needed in order to become sheriffs. As far as this goes, I'm all for transparency. They're going to look as good as they show up as, if they're doing well, and that's captured, that's great. I'm a big proponent of the vest cams, the body worn cameras, the dash cams, all of that. I think we pay for this technology. I think we should have it. We should be using it. It protects them and the citizens. So I think that we'll see. As far as monetizing stuff, I mean, they could use all the help that they can get with their budget. But I think that there's some difference between transparency for gain or entertainment versus public knowledge, but we'll see how they do.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Lisa that I've been, and written a bunch in the journal about the need for transparency and promoting transparency when it comes to body worn cameras. And I think there is, a potential benefit there to this. And there certainly are studies that show when cops have body worn cameras on, there's fewer complaints, whether that's because they behave better or because citizens know things are being recorded and less likely to file a frivolous complaint is up in the air. But those studies have proven out that there are fewer complaints. So I think more cameras generally is a really good thing. I think the big question I have with with the show is, a lot of these shows can be very demeaning and predatory for the people who are subject to law enforcement actions, capturing people at the worst moments of their lives and turning that into entertainment, which, I personally think is gross and not helpful to society. I don't know. I haven't seen the show. The clips that I tried to look up online were not what has been described in the staff report as far as like live coverage of police officers on patrol. So I do think there is probably a ethical way to to air shows like this and to show law enforcement interactions without demeaning the people involved in or even identifying the people involved in them. And I think there's potentially a lot of benefit to that, but I think it can be a really slippery slope to some pretty gross stuff pretty quickly, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So we're going to take a real quick break, and when we get back, we're going to keep discussing what's been going on in the past week or so and what's happening in Humboldt County. You're listening to Thursday Night Talk. Welcome back to Thursday Night Talk. I'm your host, Talvi Freed, here with Thaddeus Greenson, editor for the North Coast Journal, Ryan Huston, freelance reporter, currently working heavily with Kim Kemp, police and music reporter for KMUD. And we just we're still kind of discussing the sheriffs. This is not a show about sheriffs, but man, they've been in the news a lot lately. If you missed the first segment, we discussed the Cal Poly training manual that was sent before police presence was had during the protests at Cal Poly, as well as the new reality TV show coming up On Patrol Live, where Thad, I feel like you had some great points there, which is I'm less concerned with how good or bad the police are going to look. We do have some ridiculously, we have front page picture face police force in Humboldt County. I will say that, we don't have ugly PD out here very often. Kidding. You're all beautiful. We all know Sheriff Hansel looks like he stepped out of the Andy Griffith TV show. We know he did. It's ridiculous. He looks like he belongs in a Hollywood movie. So I understand why Humboldt County would be approached to put the local sheriff's office on TV, because they are they're very sheriffs. I'll say that. Is there a rule that they have to look like that to be in the PD? Maybe that's why, gotta lower their expectations. Kidding. They are gonna have their On Patrol Live TV show happening. I'm worried more about the citizens of Humboldt County and what they're gonna look like, because not all days are good days. Some people have bad days, some people get caught in weird mixed up situations, and I just think with a camera crew present, that's going to distract the sheriffs from doing their job. They're going to be trying to look good, though they made it in the news again, thanks to the grand jury report that is calling, which is interesting because the look at the sheriff's office making decisions like having a TV show, while the grand jury is telling them you need a civilian oversight. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons. It's no, you don't need a TV show, you need to do your job. So grand jury report, anybody read it, or is it just me who loves reading?
I've seen it. I missed it.
I've read all the grand jury reports. I'm a grand jury dweeb.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Thad, I'll let you take it away.
Well, yeah, the grand jury called on the sheriff's office to implement a system of citizen oversight, and is recommending actually a model that very similar to what Eureka has implemented over the last couple of years, which is to have a citizen review board, which basically exists to kind of hear citizen complaints as kind of a neutral fielding apparatus for those. and then also to kind of weigh in on Eureka Police Department policy, or in this case, it would be Sheriff's Department policy. And then there would be another arm, which would be kind of an independent auditor position. I forget exactly how the grand jury terms it with the recommendation for the sheriff's office, but for the Eureka Police Department, it's determined to be an independent auditor. And this is a paid position that has kind of full access to internal affairs investigations, and then the grand jury is actually recommending that the sheriff's office entity have subpoena power, so they can drag deputies in against their will to testify, and also subpoena documents from the sheriff's office. And so this would be kind of a third party oversight, looking over the the internal affairs process of the sheriff's office, and then making recommendations to this the citizen oversight board. So it's kind of a two-pronged system, which I will say in Eureka seems to have worked very well. Both the I think that citizens have received it well, and then actually the Eureka Police Department has been very positive about it and has said that it has led them to improve their internal affairs investigation process, and has led to kind of another layer of transparency that that has been well received.
What do you think prompted this? That, like, do you
Well,
think it was a specific incident or just recognizing the benefit of what EPD is doing?
Well, I think that Eureka absolutely implemented it in the wake of the texting scandal. And I don't think ever would have done it otherwise. It's something that had been talked about in Eureka for a long time, and they'd come up with kind of this chief's advisory committee that was very kind of watered down and didn't have much authority. And it took the scandal of the texting scandal to really make them do this, or to push them to do this. As far as the grand jury, I don't know why they recommended this at this time. Certainly there have been growing calls nationwide for citizen oversight bodies and stuff since since George Floyd and the ensuing protests. But I don't know why 4 years later the grand jury decided that police oversight was something they wanted to look into.
Yeah, I wonder.
I will say the foreperson in the grand jury is a former police officer, so that might have something to do with it.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that the city of Eureka had an independent auditor already. Glad to hear that that's working out. It's an interesting recommendation from the grand jury. Mm-hmm. For sure, though, how often is what the grand jury how often are they actually listened to, and will those be implemented? We'll see. Grand jury also released another report about the county mental health crisis street team. So moving a little bit away from police and to alternatives to situations that happen in the county, which I'm all for. I'm all for a mental health crisis team, or there was another term for it, like problem-oriented policing before, like the Arcata ambassadors, things like that. I'm all for that, because it seems like, police are actually very busy. They really do have a lot going on. And so if they're being bogged down by what many would consider minor things and having to use the tactics that they're trained for in those situations, it kind of seems like a waste of their time, of funding, when there are other people who can do that, such as a crisis team.
To me, that's the bigger point, is that, as much as we're increasingly training police to be, social workers and intervene in, in mental health episodes and stuff like that, they're not adequately trained to be experts in that field. And so putting real mental health professionals on the front lines of dealing with people in mental health crisis, I think is a very, very good idea. And the grand jury, I think really, the report really supports that when these teams are funded and staffed, they have been really effective in, de-escalating situations, but then also just in as far as kind of chronic situations of nudging people toward treatment, or, toward help of various kinds. I think it's been a big improvement. And as you said, Talvi, I think it does free up officers to do the, what we typically think of as far as crime response, which isn't, dealing with the person in crisis on the plaza or elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's sending the right person to the right address, the right person for the job. And, I know CSET, those guys have had a really great, success there. I hear on the scanner all the time, the crisis team getting called out. And, I think it's really important. It behooves us all to fund those programs and to keep them staffed, because sometimes there aren't crisis people available for those situations. And, I think our officers do deal with a myriad of issues that, really run the scope. And getting them, to go back to the Cal Poly Humboldt thing, if you're showing up expecting violence, you kind of show up with a different mindset than, talking somebody down.
So not taking this away from the police, though, I know that the fire crew out there is needing some attention. Apparently, Thad, you had written, I think it's on the cover of the North Coast Journal, so I'm sure you're going to cover it in the North Coast Journal show, though. For listeners of this show, what's going on with the fire department? There's a lot with the fire crew too.
Yeah. I mean, it's with all fire departments, which is really what kind of our story this week is exploring. Is, Humboldt Bay Fire kind of did a media tour over the last couple of weeks of just talking about the staffing crisis they're facing, which caused them to close their Myrtle Avenue station for 6 weeks, and now they're instituting kind of a rotating system of station closures. Because they're down, I think, 3 permanent positions, and then they have 4 temporary absences. So I had a chance to sit down with the folks at Humboldt Bay Fire, and then thought, let's check in with other departments, because I'd heard, anecdotally over and over again that especially volunteer fire departments were having a really hard time, both fiscally, but then also recruiting volunteers to work on a daily basis. And what our reporting found is that there isn't a department in Humboldt County that isn't facing really significant challenges. And those vary from department to department, from professional departments to volunteers. But what I heard consistently from volunteer chiefs is that it's just really, really hard to get volunteers, and that some of them are at, half the staff that they had, fairly recently, just a handful of years ago. And there's a whole myriad of factors of why folks aren't signing up to volunteer. Certainly that the training requirements have gotten kind of exponentially larger. They're essentially, volunteer firefighters now have the same training requirements as professionals. So the time investment has just increased hugely. A lot of chiefs and other folks also talked about just the financial factors, facing most families and most households right now, is that it's, cost of living is going up, and wages have been pretty stagnant, and it's just harder for folks to make ends meet. And so people are putting off retirement longer, which, a lot of early retirees used to be the kind of lifeblood of volunteer fire departments, and that's kind of gone away. And then on the fiscal side, departments are just facing, the challenge of having kind of a stagnant funding source, generally through property tax allocations and property tax assessments, which, stay fairly flat. And all of their expenses are going up, from fuel to insurance to the cost of equipment.
I had spoke with Humboldt Bay Fire during their press tour, and one of the things that Chief Robertson really spoke about was, because they're paid firefighters, getting someone to stay here or to join their ranks when they're getting, he said, $30,000 less across the board for all the positions. And so they're losing people that are committed to the firefighting profession, to even Arcata Fire, over to the east to Reading. So they're losing people with invaluable institutional knowledge, and then having to bring these new firefighters up and get them trained up into those ranks really quickly, and they just don't have the pull for it because people aren't signing up. And then to be able to get them to sign up with that lower pay is just pretty incredible. Not to mention the short staffing really impacts them. It was really touching to me in our interview that Chief Robertson spoke about the told that it takes just that little bit of extra coverage from who they're down and how that adds to their already heavy burden. You know, firefighters are at a much higher risk for PTSD, and he spoke to the, you know, horrific scenes that local volunteer fire department personnel have gone to in Fortuna. Especially, we had some really horrific car accidents that involved fire, and we're a small community. These people, you know, our firefighters know the people that they're attempting to save, and it's a really heavy load for them. And for them, the burnout is a real factor there. And to not be fairly compensated on top of it is just, you know, not looking so great. But Chief Robertson and Captain Harlander both were saying, best job in the world. Even amidst all of that, they really love it, and they really encourage people to come out and, you know, jump in. But they're up against it. All those departments are.
Mm-hmm. I should add in, all those points are great, Lisa. You know, Humboldt Bay Fire also did have a new MOU passed and or approved just in the last week, and so their pay rates have come up pretty significantly, and so they're not you know, in line with Reading and some of the larger departments, but they are much more competitive, which Chief Robertson was very pleased about and hopeful about.
And the bonus is you don't have to live in Reading, which for those who love the ocean and the forest and love Humboldt, it's kind of a bummer how much of a pay cut you have to take to live out here, and how kind of very frugally you have to live to make ends meet. I think that's across the board though. So let's see, we've got police need people, fire crew needs people, med crew needs people. So all the first responders need people, and everybody's hiring. It sounds like the city has a few positions open, City of Eureka, City of Arcata. So everyone seems to be hiring, but why are there so many people without jobs?
Fair question. You know, it was interesting in talking to Chief McDonald at Arcata Fire. They have a higher pay rate than Humboldt Bay Fire and have a much easier time attracting and retaining kind of mid-level and lower level staffers or firefighters. But he was saying that the kind of their executives, their kind of top level command staff, they've had a really hard time recruiting and retaining folks. And I was just struck by what he was saying was very much in line with what I've heard from, you know, from hospital CEOs up here and other professional ranks of, you know, saying that it's really, you know, the cost of living, and then the kind of ability for significant others of kind of your recruiting target to make a parallel move in their industry up here is just really prohibitive. And so Chief McDonald was talking about they had a senior I don't know, somebody in their administrative staff who was commuting from Turlock for, you know, like 8 months or something, trying to make it work to move his family up here. But his partner couldn't find a job up here that suited them, and they ended up taking a firefighting job down in Turlock instead of moving up here. But it would just seem very similar to what I've heard about the challenges recruiting and retaining doctors up here and stuff like that.
I would agree. Yeah.
So this was news to me, though. This is specifically for Ryan. There's something going on at the Veterans Hall, and I'm not sure which Veterans Hall, though I was told that there has been something that you're reporting on. It was like a last minute thing. So I'm curious what is going on at the Veterans Hall.
At the Veterans Hall in Garberville? Where?
Okay. If there's something going on there, then yes, that's the one.
Oh, Lisa, do you know? Because I think that they're remodeling. I haven't covered this, but I'm aware. So you take it.
So on last Tuesday at the Board of Supervisors meeting, there was before the board the request to increase the funding for the replacement of the John Haynes Memorial Veterans Hall there in Garberville, which was tore down after deferred maintenance rendered the building inhabitable due to black mold. And so the county is kind of on the hook for this one because it was an agreement that they had with the veterans, and they also had a court in that previous building. They had come to an agreement. Supervisor Bushnell ran on this platform when she was first elected, promised to get this done this term as well. So basically inflation's happened. It was supposed to be a 3.1, I believe, $3.1 million to build the hall. It is now being estimated at 6.6. I saw somewhere else where they said 7 million. In 2 years, the cost has, almost tripled. So, yeah, they went before. Wilson was kind of the standalone. Why are we, holding out on this? Why are we bearing the burden of this? But the history here is that Veterans Hall was built. The land was donated by John Haynes's mother after he was killed in Vietnam, and the veterans, the community came together and built that hall. They owned it. The county came in and wanted to have a courthouse there. They worked out a deal where they could add on a little courthouse if they took care of the maintenance. However, the maintenance was deferred. It became dilapidated. The veterans at that time had insisted that they could fix it, but the county refused and demolished the building. And so they have now been without a building since, I believe, 2016. So, yeah, it's been a long time coming. It's riles all the Southern Humboldters up. So there was a big turnout at that Board of Supervisors meeting in support, and the supervisors voted 4-1 in favor of finding the money. Where they're going to find it, I don't know, but they voted to find the money.
Isn't that the question? Where are we going to find the money for all of these things that we need? That's a great question. Maybe we'll get to it. Maybe we'll find all the answers right after this quick break. You're listening to Thursday Night Talk. Welcome back to Thursday Night Talk. I am here with Thaddeus Greenson, Ryan Huston, and Huston Yupik. We are discussing what's happening in Humboldt County, what's been going on. If you missed the beginning parts, don't worry. You can catch us on YouTube. You can catch us on channel 12 on our Access Humboldt channel. As well, probably all over the place. If you're listening on the radio, this also repeats on the radio. So don't worry, you can go back and catch the rest of it another point. If you have been listening, we might have time for a couple questions. If you have questions, text them to 707-498-4146. Again, that's 707-498-4146. We are kind of popcorning around all sorts of different topics at this point. Because the county fair is coming up pretty quickly, and I'm all about it. I love the county fair, though I did find it very, very interesting that of all the embezzlement issues, because if anybody had worked for the fair in years prior, I'm pretty sure they would have been like, well, duh, like that had to have been happening. Did you know who was running it? Just saying that people might say that. And that's kind of what it turned out to be. So there was a whole embezzlement issue, but now I'm so confused with what's actually going on. There was a ghost payroll going on. There's a plea hearing happening. Thad, you might know more about you pay more attention to the actual happenings. I just sit there and read the headlines and laugh.
Well, since the journal took on the Ferndale Enterprise and publishing it as well, we have been covering the fair and keeping tabs on it pretty closely. So yeah, their former bookkeeper Nina Taffarella was arrested and has been charged with federally with 5 counts of wire fraud related to what prosecutors have described as you said, this ghost payroll scheme where she allegedly fabricated employees in in the fair's bookkeeping system, and then made electronic payments basically to these fake employees that then these wired or these electronic payments then went to her bank account allegedly. And this went on over the course of most of 2 years. I think it was about 21 months. So first of all, I'll just say that it has been painful just to watch the Fair Association kind of try to pick up the pieces from what happened, creating entirely new accounting systems, trying to track, how much was really lost. I think the total that they've come up with and law enforcement has come up with is about $430,000 in theft alone. But then there's been all of this stuff that's come up as far as taxes that weren't paid or payroll taxes that were underpaid and things like that. But yeah, Ms. Taffarella has a change of plea hearing scheduled for a few months from now. I think it's in September, which indicates a plea deal is likely in the works, although we don't know that for sure, and none of the lawyers involved in the case will comment on it. So that's kind of where things stand.
Well, she's potentially looking at 20 years maximum in prison as well. So
20 years per count, I believe.
I
mean, she certainly won't see that, but I think that is a maximum exposure of 100 years.
How, because I feel like everybody that was working for the fair kind of left after this. I would call this a pretty big scandal. This is a small community. We all love the fair a lot. I know a lot of people who have worked with it in one facet or another. It's a huge bummer, though. What has the fair been doing to, I'm not exactly sure who's in what position there. I know they've have a whole new office full of people. So I'm curious what's even going on. How are they recovering from this?
Well, I think an important distinction with the fair too is that, I mean, if somebody embezzles from a business, that's certainly regrettable, but you can kind of say it's on that business. With the Fair Association, I mean, this is a quasi-public entity, but very much a public asset and a public trust, and a lot of these funds were public dollars, were COVID relief monies that the fair received. So I think there's a kind of a different level of public interest in what happens with the fair. But yeah, there's been a huge turnover in staff there since this happened. Rich Slachy was the general manager when the embezzlement took place. He retired, and Jill Duffy, the former Humboldt County supervisor, stepped in on an interim basis for about a year. And now Moira Kenny, a longtime office manager there, has stepped in as the CEO. The board has remained, I think, fairly steady. They're looking to fill a couple seats if anybody's looking to volunteer. But really, as I said before, I mean, they have outsourced a lot of their accounting stuff to have kind of external checks and balances. They've updated their systems so that there is nobody kind of approving and cutting checks. It seemed like I think the first story we wrote, in-depth story we wrote about this, a couple of years ago, was kind of saying if you read through what makes an organization susceptible to fraud, the checklist, the Humboldt County Fair is checking all those boxes. There was just really little fiscal oversight, really very few checks and balances. And it seemed like a lot of organizational kind of chaos, to be frank. And from the outside looking in, it seems like they've taken a lot of steps, and a lot of pretty painful steps as far as reorganizing to make sure something like this doesn't happen again.
Anybody else want to chime in on the first
say,
affair?
I just didn't realize it was so sophisticated, and I hesitate to use that term, but I didn't realize the extent of it logistically,
Of the alleged embezzlement itself?
Yes.
I will say it was very sophisticated in certain ways. And in other ways, it was kind of like, if somebody was really looking, it would be glaring, because the way the payroll amounts fluctuated and the way they were so inflated and kind of off, the fair has a lot of workers when the fair is on. but in in months that aren't, kind of in the lead up to the fair or the immediate aftermath, it's a pretty small organization. And so somebody really could have noticed that payroll was 30 grand above what it should have been, you'd think. But at the same time, if the allegations are true, she did a pretty good job of kind of disguising what she knew people might be looking at, to not reflect the embezzlement.
I see. Because I was thinking, who are these mystery employees? Isn't somebody going to notice? God, I've never met John over there who gets a monthly, it just seemed odd that didn't surface.
What she allegedly did is took like real employees' names. So instead of being Ryan Hudson in the QuickBooks line, it was like Ryan P. Hudson. And so she'd add like a middle initial or change one letter. So if somebody was just kind of glancing over it, they'd say, "Oh, I know Ryan." So really, unless somebody was checking those kind of like end of month financials that and thought like, again, why did payroll jump 30 grand in January when we don't have anything going on? They wouldn't have noticed.
And that this was over 2 years, right? So like 230,000 a year.
Yes.
I
I think it was about 430,000 total, but yeah, it was over 21 months. So, and it started, as these things typically do, I'm told it started fairly slow and then just kind of hit a point where it seems, from the paper trail that somebody felt untouchable, like, oh, nobody is looking at this stuff. And so I really am at liberty to take more.
So what Humboldt needs now, so we need more cops, fire crew, medical staff, honest accountants, office staff. Alrighty, so if anybody's looking for a job, everybody's hiring.
Nurses, we need nurses.
Definitely nurses.
Nurses, paramedics, doctors, dentists, anything. We'll take anything at this point. Please be qualified though. I think that's probably the hardest step for everybody, is to get the qualifications required. I have full belief that many people could do a lot of these jobs, so just walking in off the street, which that would then be an educational issue, which this isn't a show about the educational issues in Humboldt County, is it? Though it can be next week, though we've got a few minutes for each of you. Just to start our round robin, you've got about 3 minutes each. I'm gonna start with Lisa, and it's just a whatever you want people listening at home or watching on channel 12 or on YouTube, whatever you want them to take away with them when they walk away from watching this show.
Watching this show in particular? Oh, Talvi's a great host. Thank you.
You can also just talk about what you want.
So I really want to encourage people. I think Ryan got to see some of my fire last night, reading those Public Records Act documents from Humboldt County Sheriff's. Is really pay attention, because this is much more than what side you land on. It's about a fair and free press being able to do the job, and the same with having body-worn cameras and whatnot. And in any space, you want to be able to have transparency, and that's what the press, good press, tries to do. So I think really paying attention to anytime that is being usurped, I think that's important. Somebody today had said, like, the police were protecting your reporters by pushing them out, and legally we have the right to be there. This is what we do. We walk behind the fire lines, behind all the lines, to make sure that you guys are informed, and so that your public servants are working for you. And I applaud that. I'm a huge fan. He might be the king of Humboldt County PRA. So thank you for doing the hard work, and just keep it tuned to your news station, and pay attention.
Well, thank you. Ryan, how about you get a couple minutes just to just what's on your mind?
Well, thank you. I think I'm going to pile on what Lisa was talking about. It's very much front and center for me. The Cal Poly protest issue, the occupation that spurred these arrests. what I would call an overzealous law enforcement response. I would also agree previously when Lisa said that the description of our local protesters, many of whom are students, as violent opportunists. I think that's the farthest thing from the truth. Having made it a point to show up every Friday at the courthouse where they protest from 4 to 6 p.m., which I'm not sure that's going to continue through the summer. But they've been holding that weekly protest, Humboldt for Palestine, to be specific. So they've been holding that corner down every Friday, weekly, for several months now, probably over 7 months since October 7th. They started in Arcata, moved to the courthouse. So in all that time, I have never once felt threatened or experienced or witnessed any violence on the part of those people. And so I just didn't understand at all the assertion Ryan Derby made within that training manual, where he said this is almost identical to the 2020 experience that he must have had. I'm assuming with the George Floyd protests locally here. I don't really see much similarity, actually, because so far Humboldt for Palestine has not been marching against traffic, taking up 3 lanes, for several days in a row. That hasn't happened. So, and the protesters in the George Floyd moment in time there never occupied a building. So they are distinctly different, right? And they have different motivations. But yeah, going back to that, I would say, I feel very strongly about protection of free speech and the press and people's ability to express dissent safely. I think political dissent is really important no matter which side you're on, because I think change has to kind of come from the ground up, right? So I love a good protest. I love being there as the fly on the wall. It's not always comfortable, but I do enjoy it for some crazy reason. And having said that, I would just say my favorite hashtag is hashtag free the press. And I'm going to keep using that when I can, when it's appropriate. So I thought I'd throw that out there. Yeah, so I'm going to keep looking at courthouse issues and the Cal Poly. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Thad.
Yeah, I just want to echo, I think, everything Lisa and Ryan said as far as, protecting press access, advocating for press access, advocating for transparency in government. I mean, I think though, we say at the Journal all the time that, a bias we'll readily admit is transparency. We are pro-transparency. We are pro-reform and making things better. And whether it is Cal Poly Humboldt or the situation with Eureka City Schools and the Jacobs the Jacobs Middle School campus, there's just been a startling lack of transparency in government recently that is, I feel like eclipses what I'd seen previously in 20 years of reporting here, and that's really troubling to me. But the last thing I really want to press on here is there's been a theme in the reporting I've done recently. I'm working on some grand jury stuff now and the fire department stuff that we discussed. Organizations are having a really tough time getting volunteers. And so I understand that lots of households in Humboldt County are just kind of struggling to make it through. But if you are at a space where you have the privilege of time, then please volunteer. We all love this community and there's a gazillion different ways to help out, whether food for people, whether becoming a volunteer fire department or just agreeing to host a fundraiser for a volunteer fire department, or serving on the Humboldt County Civil Grand Jury, which is desperately looking for jurors for next term. There's lots and lots of opportunities to get involved and, lend your time, which is a great gift and helps make this community better. So if you can, please do volunteer.
Thank you, Thad. Speaking of, almost forgot about that. There is every ward in Eureka, it gets 15 grand that must be spent on the community. It's you can go to eurekaca.gov/pb and submit your ideas that you want to use that money for, which is a small and simple way that you can be involved by just giving input about what you'd like to see happen. Cool on City of Eureka doing that. So that's about all the time we have today. Thank you to Thaddeus Greenson, editor for the North Coast Journal. Ryan Huston, freelance reporter, mostly working with Kim Kemp right now. I believe is where you can find most of the articles that have come out recently. And Lisa, music reporter for KMUD. We're all big fans of KMUD here, so we're big fans of all of the other media groups, most of the other media groups. Okay, all of them, maybe. Don't assume that anybody else part of Access Humboldt agrees with me on that one. If you have topics or suggestions for Thursday Night Talk, please email us at kzzh@accesshumboldt.net. This show will replay Friday evening at 8 p.m. right here on KZZH 96.7 FM. You can watch the show on Access Humboldt's YouTube channel as well. Just look up Access Humboldt. Hours and hours and hours of Thursday Night Talk. Pretty impressive. Thank you to our panelists, and I will see everybody next Thursday or on a repeat of this show.